History of Russia. Russia was founded by the Eastern Slavs in the 9th century AD, and the book Initial History is the oldest book that talks about Russia, in which it is mentioned that the city of Kiev was founded in 1111 AD, when Slavic groups fought in the city of Novgorod. Then they asked one of the Vikings known as the Men of the North, ruled the region, spread security among them, and named it Varangian Rus, in the name of the land of the Russians. In the 10th century AD, the dynasty of ruler Rurik was founded, and the Golden Age began with the rule of Prince Vladimir the Great, who converted Russian Kiev into the Byzantine Christian system, and became a Christian. And culturally in Eastern Europe under the rule of Yaroslav the Wise. Mongol control of Russia. The Mongols or Tatars invaded Russia and destroyed many cities in it. Thus, the Mongols ended the rule of Russian Kiev, as the Mongol control of Russia continued from 1237 until 1240 AD. It is worth mentioning that the Tatars established the Russian tribal empire in southern Russia, and in the 14th century AD, Ivan I defeated the Tatars in the Tver Principality, and in the 15th century AD the campaign to collect land began, where the Moscovite princes followed the policy of collecting the Russian lands, which is the Eastern Slavic lands, and in 1480 AD the control of the Mongols over Russia ended with the victory of Ivan III over them, but in 1547 AD, Ivan IV ascended the throne. He became the first Tsar of Russia and imposed central administration and military discipline, and declared his coup against the nobility. The Romanov dynasty in Russia. Russia experienced many upheavals during the period between 1604 and 1613 AD. Where many political upheavals occurred, its pillars were torn apart by foreign invasion, and civil wars occurred in it, paving the way for Mikhail Romanov to become the Tsar of Russia at that time. In 1689 and 1725 AD, Peter the Great implemented many reforms on a large scale, including in churches, government, and the army. Notably, he built the capital in 1703, when he laid the initial foundations of St. Petersburg, and began building the capital. During the period between 1798 to 1815 AD, Russia participated in the European alliances against France during the rule of Napoleon, where it was defeated in 1812 AD. After the victory, the army returned to Russia with liberal ideas to try to stand in the face of the Romanovs, and to establish a constitutional government, which led to the outbreak of a revolution known as the Decembrist Revolution, in 1825 AD, at the hands of the army, but they failed. During the period between 1853 and 1857 AD, Russia fought the Crimean War. In an attempt to seize some territory from the Ottoman Empire, it failed and was defeated, and with the Romanov family continuing to rule Russia, Russia expanded at the expense of the Ottoman Empire, incorporating some Muslim countries. From Asia, it also expanded in Japan, and democratic parties were established in it, and in 1917 AD the rule of the Romanovs ended with the abdication of Nicholas II from the throne, and the control of the communists or the Bolsheviks over him, and one of the most prominent events that occurred during this period was Russia's withdrawal from World War I. Russia under Stalin. A war broke out between the Bolsheviks and the White Russians between 1918 and 1922 AD, and ended with the victory of the Bolsheviks and the Soviet expansion, and in 1922 AD the Bolsheviks established the Soviet Union, and the era of Joseph Stalin began, which followed a new economic policy, and the most important thing that happened during Stalin's era was the termination of Russia's treaty with Germany, a non-aggression treaty, and then control over eastern Poland and some parts of Romania, Czechoslovakia and the Baltic states, after the start of World War II. Stalin established his army in the hope that Germany would invade Russia, and Germany suddenly invaded Russia in 1941 AD, but Britain and the United States supported Russia with the necessary military equipment, and in 1945 the Allies defeated Germany and expanded the Soviets, and in the Middle and also, where Stalin appeared in the policy of heavy industrialization he expanded in that period, and in 1947 the Cold War began with the West, and Stalin began to consolidate his power in Europe, China, the Middle East, the Near East, and in Asia. In 1949 the nuclear arms race began, and the Cold War continued, and expanded until it became global and was not limited to only several countries, and despite the death of Stalin in 1953, the communist control continued and strong, but the dictatorial control in the government refused to a certain extent. After him, Nikita Khrushchev, who gradually began to improve Soviet relations with the West. In 1964 Khrushchev was overthrown by the main communists, Leonid Brezhnev came to power, and he and Prime Minister Alexei Kosygin pursued a policy of expanding the state's territory. The Soviet Union in Africa. Stagnation period in the history of Russia. The Soviet Union went through a period of stagnation since 1965 AD, and the stagnation continued until 1991 AD. During this period, Alexei Kosygin tried to promote economic production and competition by decentralizing his plans, but failed, and his plans were thwarted. Because of the opposition of conservative parties to him, Leonid's rule was consolidated, and he became the most powerful leader in the Soviet Union at that time, and despite following a policy of détente since the mid-1970s, which expresses the easing of tension between East and West, this policy soon collapsed in the late 1970s. The relationship between the Soviet Union and the United States of America also became somewhat bad on various issues. In 1985 Gorbachev emerged and assumed the presidency of the Communist Party and had a great influence in the Soviet Union, where he made many changes, allowing greater freedom of expression, whether in political matters, or in matters of literature, arts, etc. As he worked hard to improve the Soviet relationship with the West, and reduce the state's dominance over the economy, and in 1989 AD the first free elections to the People's Assembly were held, and the following year non-communist political parties were allowed to be established in the Soviet Union, but this met with great opposition from a large number of members from the Communist Party, and many Soviet officials rejected Gorbachev's reforms. However, he was elected in 1990 AD to be president. Russia's independence. In 1991, Russia gained its independence under Boris Yeltsin, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and the Commonwealth of Independent States was formed, in which most of the Soviet republics joined, with the exception of the Balkans. In 1993, a referendum was held on a new constitution granting the president enormous powers. Russia joined the NATO Peace Partnership Program in 1994, and it is worth noting that Yeltsin was re-elected to the presidency again in 1996. Then he resigned in 1999 in favor of Putin.